Do you ever find that you sabotage the efforts that you're trying to put forward in order to be healthier or to make changes to your life? So many people find themselves in these self-sabotage cycles. But what if this self-sabotage that a lot of people experience is actually your body's way of protecting you? On today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, Julie and I sit down with intuitive eating coach Victoria Evans to discuss this idea of self-sabotage and how it surfaces in so many things we do throughout the day, including the food choices we make. We're going to cue the intro song and then we're going to dive right into this conversation. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, what's going on, exercisers? This is Charlie. Before we dive into this week's episode, I want to let you know that this Thursday, I'm going to be hosting a training called Exercise for Life Secrets. So if you are looking for the key things, like the top things that you need to be doing in order to consistently and sustainably build your health with exercise, that is exactly what I'm going to be discussing in this Thursday's training. All you have to do to get registered for free is go to secrets.exerciseforlifemethod.com. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, here in Schaumburg, Illinois, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. Now, so many of you exercisers have taken the time out of your day to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, and we truly appreciate it. So we want to take a second right now to highlight a review that we recently received.
This 5-star review says, "Excited about your podcast. Fantastic info. You guys are so fun and easy to listen to. I love the episode about the benefits of exercise. I have osteoporosis and feel strongly about maintaining bone health. Very good job explaining all the different categories of benefits. I look forward to future episodes. Thank you." We would love it if you would also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. All you have to do is go to your Apple Podcast app, scroll to the bottom, and leave a rating and review. And you never know, you might hear your review on the podcast next time.
Now, today we are discussing a topic that many people experience, but not many people talk about. And it's this idea of self-sabotage, and especially as it pertains to our food choices and our nutrition. And to lead us in this discussion, we are bringing you a rock star guest, none other than Victoria Evans. Victoria Evans began her career in the corporate world with a prominent Fortune 500 company in the beauty industry in Montreal. During this time, her challenges related to eating disorders, mental health, extreme dieting, and overexercising became a catalyst for creating a solution to an issue millions of women deal with today. As a successful intuitive eating coach, she is disrupting the wellness industry through her fundamentally science-based approach. Victoria helps countless women heal the relationship with food by optimizing their mindset for happier and healthier lifestyles. She is Canadian but currently resides in Portugal while providing solutions to women through her online coaching program. Well, Victoria, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to our show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, right on. Absolutely. So tell me, how do you define intuitive eating?
Yeah, so I kind of take a bit of a different approach in terms of how I actually define it. So the official definition of intuitive eating is really making food choices without experiencing guilt or ethical dilemma, honoring your hunger, respecting your fullness, and enjoying the pleasure of eating. That's kind of the official one. Mine is much more rooted in this idea that intuitive eating is really the result of having healed your relationship with food. It's more eating from a place of neutrality, and it talks a lot about self-care. So when you no longer have like the moral connotation of this is good or this is bad, when you peel back all the kind of layers of shame and guilt and rules and all that, what's kind of left over is really our ability to listen to our body, eat, work out, live in a way that feels good for us. And a lot of the time we spent our entire life kind of looking outward to be told how to eat, how to move, how to live our life. And it's every single person's body is completely different. Only we know what's really best for us. And so intuitive eating, we were born as intuitive eaters. And what I help clients do is really get back to that state where they're deeply connected to their body and can trust their own body.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, my wife and we have a daughter that's almost 3 and a son that's almost 1, and they know what they want to eat. there's no,
Yeah.
there's no stigma around like, maybe I shouldn't have mac and cheese right now, or maybe I shouldn't have an icy pop, or maybe I shouldn't have whatever. Like they know what they want to eat, and they have no shame in asking for it. And it definitely seems like as we go throughout, our childhood into young adulthood, into full-blown adulthood, there's, like you're saying, more and more stigmas and more layers put on us, whether it's social pressures, whether it's what we're being told from the media, from the news, or what we're being taught in school about like what's healthy for us and everything like that. And so I can definitely see where that can lead to some dangers. That can lead to an unhealthy emotional relationship with food. So it sounds to me like what you are helping people with is not just their nutrition, don't eat this kind of thing, but like actually the emotion behind what they view food as and the role food plays in their life. Is that accurate?
Totally. And so I am not a dietitian. I am not a nutritionist. So I don't tell people eat this, not that. I'm really about teaching the psychology behind food because I think all of us know, what's quote unquote healthy and quote unquote unhealthy, right? So why don't we do those things? Well, it's so much more complicated than I should eat this, not that, right? It's the emotion we put behind it. It's a coping mechanism. Am I deeply lonely and food makes me feel like I'm loved at night when I'm all alone? And, am I telling myself I can't have the chocolate, which means I want it 10 times more? So, I think the way I kind of approach it, and I'm someone who, works out hard. I love to CrossFit. I love to like be really, healthy. And I look at intuitive eating as this beautiful foundation to heal your relationship with food. And then from there, if you want to add in some, some nutrition and really optimizing things, amazing. But I really don't think we can kind of do the other way around, because if you're trying to go on these, different kind of diets and rules and everything without really getting to the core of what's actually going on in a relationship with food, my body, and exercise, you're just, putting a band-aid over a bullet wound. You're going to just consistently be messing up, consistently be faulting, and then blaming yourself, not understanding. And I'm sure we'll go into it, right? What we think is self-sabotage is really self-protection. And unless we understand what we're kind of protecting ourselves from, what is that unmet need, we're just going to continue to make those mistakes again and again and again.
I love that. I love that you're going into that, because that's exactly kind of what my next question is. Like, okay, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people making, or what are some of the biggest challenges that they face, when choosing foods that they're wanting to eat or choosing not to eat? And then kind of how does that then, kind of a two-part question, then how does that lead into these destructive eating behaviors and this self-sabotage, which, like you said, is actually self-protection?
Yeah, totally. So one of the biggest things, and I'll kind of really break this down because it's kind of a bit weird to get your head around, but it's making things off limits, right? We are so quick to say, I can't have this chocolate, I can't have this cake, I can't have whatever these things are. And the fact of the matter is, restriction creates rebellion and allowance creates space for choice. So I'll also refer back to ironic processes theory, which is basically this, psychological theory whereby basically any kind of a deliberate attempt to suppress certain thoughts make them more likely to resurface. It's like me telling you, don't think about pink elephants, and you're thinking about pink elephants, right? It's the same thing with food. We tell ourselves, I can't have this cookie, I can't have this chocolate, I can't. And then we fixate on it and we become so obsessed with it. So that would probably be one of the first things. And I know we're going to kind of dig into as well how to overcome them, but one of the first things would be making things off limits. One of the second things I would say is trying to compensate. So maybe you ate too much the day before, or maybe you ate them up too much today. and you're trying to, maybe restrict, or maybe even you're trying to, work out to try to burn it off, right? And so when we're really intentionally trying to restrict, to try to compensate after eating too much, this is what it's called, basically the overeat or the binge restrict cycle. And so basically you're restricting, I can't have it, I can't have it, I can't have it. And then you end up going the other way. Almost think of it like a pendulum swing, right? Or even you maybe think about it like a bow and arrow, like when you kind of pull it back, restrict, 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 you let it go and it's going to go flying, right? So when you're intentionally trying to restrict food, what happens is you end up compensating, kind of swinging all the way the other way, which there's nothing wrong with you if that happens. It's nothing, you're not broken. There's nothing that's biologically wrong. Again, not self-sabotage, self-protection. It's your body's job to keep you alive and intentionally make sure that you're not restricting and not, depriving yourself of too many calories, because your body doesn't care if you look good and you look good in your bikini or whatever it is. It wants to keep you alive. And so you have to be very intentional with what you're doing when you're eating what you think was maybe too much, because you can really set yourself up to have that really overeat or that binge response, depending on how you react to it. It's kind of like white knuckling, right? It's kind of like you're just, okay, I can't have the cookie, I can't have the cookie, I can't have the cookie. I had too many cookies earlier, and then you just eventually kind of give into it and let that kind of instinct that your body has take over. And again, there's nothing that's gone wrong there. It's just that your body is designed to avoid famine. And because our body doesn't know the difference between restriction and dieting and famine, because our brain hasn't evolved quickly enough over the last few hundred years to really be able to differentiate. So your brain is freaking out, thinking this is like a threat to survival. So it's going to do everything in its biological power to go to get you to, eat that food. And then we view ourselves as a failure and all of that, when in reality, it was just our body doing its job.
I love that you're bringing this up, because one, it highlights the fact that our modern day desires, our brain really doesn't care about those, right? It cares about what can we do to survive? Are you under a threat right now? If you're not, keep doing what you're doing. If you are, what can we do to survive? That's really all it cares about. And then it's this struggle that we all face to be like, well, but I really want to do these things. And your brain's saying, yeah, but you're safer over here. I find it the same with exercise, where it's like when people go from a rested state where your brain says, you're safe here, you're good. And then they start some physical activity and their brain starts freaking out. And it's like, no, you are good on the couch. You are safe on the couch. And it's like, no. Like from an exercise perspective, you got to kind of get past that a little bit. But from a nutrition perspective and from an eating perspective, I can see how that can actually be really dangerous if your brain is saying, no, like you actually need to eat. And we are saying, well, no, but beach season's coming up. Like I want to look this way or whatever. And it's this conflict. And so I can see how that can become a spiral really quickly. So like what can be done about this, right? Like what can be done about these destructive eating behaviors that so many people develop?
Yeah. So I love that you as well touched on kind of what I kind of talk about, especially with clients, is like, how can you create safety in the body, right? Because our brain, like you said, it does not care if you are happy or, looking super shredded. It wants to make sure you're safe. And so, our brain views something that is safe as something that is familiar. So when it comes to fitness and movement, anything that is not familiar, it deems as unsafe. And even though it might not necessarily be bad or kill you, our brain is like, let's retreat back to safety, because, if it's familiar, I've done it before, it means it's not going to kill me. So, definitely there's always going to be that push when you're doing fitness and movement around like, are wanting to just kind of stay still and do the same thing again and again. And so the clients, whether it be changing eating habits or, different movement habits or whatever, it's, so important, especially working with the nervous system, to get into that safe state so that our body feels like it can try different things and not basically under threat. But that's a whole other side tangent. Anyways, what can be done about destructive eating habits? Basically, one of the biggest things, right, is not making things off limits. So permission and allowance. And I can already hear your listeners being like, if I give myself permission to eat anything I want, I'm going to eat nothing but donuts all day long. And I get it, because when I first heard about the concept of intuitive eating, I was like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Like, I will eat nothing but crap all day long. I'm going to gain 5,000 pounds and this is stupid. But the reality is you only want donuts all day long because you've told yourself you can't have those donuts, right? And so with intuitive eating, you'll quickly find that food loses its novelty. If I can have, if I had, a donut an arm's length of me every single day of the week, maybe in first couple of days, I'm having that donut a lot, but then pretty quickly it loses its novelty. I get friggin' bored of it. And rather, I realize I feel like shit if I eat donuts all day long, right? And going back to the fact that intuitive eating is a self-care framework. So if I'm eating nothing but donuts all day long, this is a red flag that something is up. Something's going on right now. Can I not, deal with my emotions? Have I not eaten enough all day? Am I feeling really overwhelmed and stressed and food is an escape for me? Right. So really looking at your relationship with food and restriction, as restriction creates that rebellious need to have that food. That's your brain doing its job. But if you have the permission to have it, if I can have as many donuts as I want, and then I eat, a couple, or maybe the first few weeks or few months, depending on how much you've been restricting it, I'm going to have that almost what they call like a honeymoon period of being excited to eat it. But then really quickly it loses its interest. And over time, that food just becomes this kind of neutral thing that I can take or leave. And I speak to that from personal experience where I used to really, I struggled with multiple eating disorders years ago, and that's kind of how I fell into this work. But, I was, exercise addiction, and I was super restrictive and shredded abs, and I would be eating nothing and super clean and cut. And then I would go and binge on the Nutella and the cookies and the chips and blah, 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 blah. Right. And it wasn't until I allowed myself to actually have those things in my everyday life that it meant I did no longer need to have those things all the time. So that's kind of the first thing, is that permission. And really the second thing is what I call fuck it eating. Basically, hopefully I can swear on this podcast. I've sworn a couple times. But basically I call it fuck it eating. This idea that basically people tell themselves they can't have the cookie, right? And then maybe later in the day after dinner, they're like, okay, I've been eating so good all day. I deserve one. So you have one, maybe it turns to two, and two turns to three. And then you say, fuck it. I've ruined my eating for the day, so I might as well go all out, finish this entire box of cookies, and then maybe I'll also eat some, chips and chocolate. And then starting tomorrow, I'll be good. I'll get back on track and I won't buy anymore. Right. And so I know for myself, this is what I would do all the time. And this is very much perfectionism, right? You have to eat perfectly. I have to be doing this exactly right. And if I stray from this, I ate too many calories, or I had this thing and I shouldn't have, it sends you into that kind of a tailspin. And so when those kind of things happen, when we eat more than we think we, should have in whatever capacity, it's so important for us to not shame ourselves, but rather get curious about it, right? If I'm eating an entire kitchen full of food, something's up. And the frustrating thing I would see with people is that they shame themselves and they get mad at themselves instead of figuring out what's going on, right? It's not normal to be eating an entire kitchen of food in one sitting unless something else is actually going on here. And, building on that, right? It's so important around the self-talk. And I used to hate this word, like self-talk, it's so stupid. But the reality is, when you're telling yourself, I'm such an idiot for eating too many cookies, or I can't believe I did that, I'm such a mess up or an F up or whatever, what actually happens when you're shaming yourself, it triggers the same part of your brain as if you're in actual physical pain. Your brain does not want to be in pain because it thinks that's a threat to survival. So it's going to do what it knows how to do to help you move away from that, aka self-soothe, which likely looks like getting more chocolate and more of those things. So it almost becomes this, negative self-talk, self-soothing spiral, where you think you're somehow motivating yourself to take a different action by shaming yourself. But in reality, you're forcing yourself to self-soothe, which likely looks like eating more of those foods and not moving as much and staying on the couch and all those kind of things. So I kind of went a couple different ways there, but hopefully that made sense in the end.
No, it totally makes sense. And especially the permission part, I can relate very strongly to that. I mean, just thinking about, going through the holiday season is when Thanksgiving came around, it was like, oh my gosh, I haven't had sweets for so long. And so it was just sweets. And then by the time Christmas came around, it's like, I could go with dessert or I couldn't, it was just you go through that period, but because you give yourself permission to have it, then that novelty kind of wears off. And then it's just whatever, I could take it or leave it. So I can definitely see how that's the case, across the board with any kind of eating. It makes total sense. So in your opinion, then, when it comes to losing weight and to people wanting to change their body, what is the kind of core foundational reason why you believe that, what's the, like the real reason that you believe people want to go about doing this?
So we live in an interesting society where, we are so very much told that if you look a certain way, if our body looks a certain way, then things are going to be great and wonderful and amazing. Now, that I'm not saying this has anything to do with like being fit and moving our body and that kind of health aspect whatsoever. But oftentimes that's not necessarily the core reason why people want to change their body. It's for aesthetic reasons. And the reason they want to change their body for aesthetic reasons is I think they're going to feel a different way about themselves when they get there. That is actually not the case, right? And rather the real reason, like, we want to lose weight and look a certain way is because that we think we're going to feel loved and valued and connected and good enough. And the thing is that, especially in my story and a lot of clients I work with, they spend so much of their life pursuing weight loss and pursuing a certain body that it deprives themselves of the opportunity to actually connect with people and live a life worth living. So I was going to the gym hours and hours and hours a day. I was weighing all my food on the food scale, and I couldn't go out because I couldn't put my food into my macro counter or my fitness pal because I couldn't count it. And so it really just almost reinforced this idea that I had to maintain or get to a certain body size in order to feel this connection and love in my life, because I wasn't getting it in my life because I was spending all my time trying to do these things in order to feel that feeling.
Yeah.
And so we want to get so, radically honest about like, what is the real reason you want to lose weight? Because, if it is you think it's going to create happiness and joy and connection, a body can't do those things. Obviously moving for mental health, all those things, I totally am supportive and I'm very much about that. But you will get to that place, or you will keep striving for that body and never actually get to the place where you think you should be or want to be. And that can become a very dangerous, very, very dangerous spiral, potentially like eating disorders or exercise addiction. And it's a place you don't want to go to. So I always want to, I think so many of us pursue this. And with that, with social media as well, our brains are very much driven by oxytocin. That is a neurotransmitter for bonding, connection, and really being a part of that tribe. So as humans, we want to feel a part of the tribe. We want to feel connected. That's just an intrinsic human thing, because thousands of years ago, if we weren't in the tribe, that was a threat to our survival. If we're not in it, we're not protected, we're kicked out, we might be killed by the lion. Therefore, the genes passed forward to today are the people who really conformed the most and fit in with the crowd. So our brain literally sees our body not looking like the people on social media and having the shredded abs as a threat to our survival, because it doesn't see itself represented in our environment. And so I'm always telling people, like, be very intentional with the environment you create for yourself in real life as well as social media, because if all you're doing is exposing yourself to an environment where you don't see your body size represented or your body type represented, your brain is firing off all these unsafe signals because it doesn't think it fits in, doesn't see itself in the tribe. So that is a really important thing, because likely if you don't see yourself, if you're only following fitness account with shredded abs people and you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're like, I don't have abs, likely that's going to lead to the negative self-talk of, oh my God, I'm so fat and disgusting and terrible and I hate myself and I need to lose weight and blah, blah, blah. Shame, 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 pain, 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 self-soothe. So it's the opposite behavior. So what I'll say with clients in this regard is, making sure you have a social media feed that doesn't cause you to just feel immense amount of shame. Add in different types of body types, see yourself represented. And with that, when it comes to the self-talk, know that negative self-talk leads to negative action and positive self-talk leads to positive action.
I love that. That's brilliant. Social media can go so many different ways, but to have like a plan by which to actually make it positive and help you reach your goals, that's huge. That's huge. So kind of along those lines, like, how would you recommend that somebody starts in on their path of intuitive eating? Like, how would you recommend that somebody starts kind of implementing this information?
Yeah. So I have so many tools. I call myself a science-based intuitive eating coach because I really take a very science brain-based approach to this. And so hopefully it's okay. I give a couple of kind of specific tools here.
Yeah.
But basically one of the first things is I always talk about with clients, it's like, you can't get to somewhere, thinking about Google Maps, you can't get to a location unless you know your current location, right? So we have to create some awareness. We have to know exactly where we are right now. And so many of us, we're going from thing to thing to thing. We have no idea what's actually happening in our body or what's going on because we're so freaking busy. We're so disconnected. And so creating that awareness. So what I like to do with clients to just create that first little bit of awareness, because when it comes to awareness, if you have awareness in other parts of your life, that's going to cross over to food. So, taking out your phone, going to your alarms, setting silent alarms. The point isn't to scare the crap out of yourself and give yourself a heart attack. So silent alarms, and change where it says, the title for the alarm, change it to things like, how am I feeling? What do I need right now? Breathe, check in. Because that's another thing as well, right? We're often so much in an anxious state, really in that kind of fight or flight, that sympathetic, that it really messes up our ability to connect to our body and figure out what we actually want. So even simple things like reminding yourself to breathe, which sounds so silly, but if we're shallow, high breathing in our chest, we're in that, sympathetic state, we're unable to connect to our body and our cues. So, lower belly breathing, really engaging that diaphragm, out and in instead of up and down with the shoulders. And from that state, it's a lot easier to kind of ask yourself what you want. So that little check-in could be breathe deep into the low belly, maybe box breathing, maybe 4-7-8 breathing, really activate that parasympathetic nervous system. So that would be kind of that first thing, is creating that awareness, maybe using some phone check-in alarms throughout the day, scheduling them in at random times. The second thing is that when you're noticing yourself get hungry, asking yourself 3 different things. So how hungry am I? What do I feel like eating? And how does this food make me feel? Now, with that, if you're feeling like I want to go eat some food and you're not actually hungry, this is okay, right? I think we shame ourselves so much for like emotional eating and stress eating and all that. Rather, this is the opportunity for you to get curious. Okay, I'm not actually hungry, but I'm finding myself walking to the cabinet right now to go get some food. What's going on right now, right? Am I using food to numb, distract, avoid from some stress at work? Did my boss just give me a huge project and I literally found myself walking to the store to go get a chocolate bar or whatever? Totally okay. But when it comes to these kind of behaviors, and they're often habitual, habits are trigger, routine, reward. So the reward would be maybe going to get the chocolate bar. The routine would be walking to go get it. We often never actually identify what the trigger actually was. So like the email from the boss, right? So we will just continue to do these habits again and again and again, shaming ourselves for the routine and reward without understanding what the trigger was. So when you're noticing that you're, wanting to go get food, you're not actually hungry, take that as a pause, realize this is your body sending you a message that something is up. I'm trying to avoid or distract, or, maybe I just really want to eat this food, and that's fine too. But creating that awareness to check in with yourself. And then if you are actually hungry, you can ask yourself those 3 questions.
Awesome. I love it.
And then the third one I would give just quickly there is people are often pretty good at, identifying when they're hungry, but they often really struggle with stopping when they're actually full. So looking at speed, right? It actually takes about 10 to 20 minutes from the time you start eating for your brain to send out signals of fullness, which means when we eat super quickly, we often eat past full because we haven't had enough time for our body to register that we're actually full.
Gotcha.
Right. And so for me, this was like, I was always going 100 miles an hour everywhere. And so when I actually was able to stop and kind of slow down when I was eating, I realized that I was much better able to feel my fullness instead of, maybe we're eating super quick now and not until like 15 minutes after we finished eating, we're like, oh my God, I ate too much. Or, we finish our plate and then we go and get just, seconds or thirds. And then it hits us like again, 10, 20 minutes later. And we're like, oh my God, like that was way too much. But it's our body didn't have the chance to even register it. So slowing down as well when we're eating is another kind of simple tip. But I have so many of these like in my programs and stuff because I love like simple, easy, actionable tools.
That's awesome. So tell us about your programs. So like, 1, how can people connect more with you? And then number 2, like, where can people work with you? What kind of programs do you have?
Yeah. So I hang out a lot on Instagram as well as on TikTok. So that's Victoria Evans Official on Instagram, and TikTok, it's Intuitive Eating with Vic, and Vic is VIC.
Cool.
I also have my own podcast called Weighing In on Happy, where we weigh in all the things that make us happy that don't include weight. And we pull from all different types of things and have really cool conversations. So different places you can find me there. In terms of working with me, I have 2 different programs currently running. So I have my 90 days to Food Freedom one-on-one coaching program. So in the title, 90 days long. And it's this incredible program. It's the one that actually completely transformed my own life that I started to teach to clients several years ago. My signature program. It's my most favorite thing on earth and gets incredible results. So if you're someone who's very logical and rational and likes clear steps for how to heal your relationship with food and really have that food freedom and feel strong and empowered in your body while eating whatever the heck you want, then that's for you. You can check that out on my website at www.victoriaevansofficial.com/coaching.
Sweet.
And then I also have a 6-week course. So if you wanted something that's maybe not as one-to-one, I have that as well. And that can be found on my website, www.victoriaevansofficial.com/programs.
Awesome.
So everything is there. Yeah.
Right on. Well, be sure to put all those links in the show notes so everybody can find it for sure. The question that we like wrapping up with for all of our guests is, Victoria, what is your definition of health?
Okay. That's a tricky question. I didn't even think about this in advance. I think health, for me, physical health, as well as mental health, as well as connection health, which is kind of an interesting one. So physical health, I want to be able to move my body. I love to smash workouts. I want to be able to do whatever the heck I want in my life with having no physical limitations. Mental health is basically physical health because you can't really have one without the other. But yeah, making sure I'm getting enough sleep at night, making sure I'm meditating, really making sure I'm taking care of those core things that allow me to show up to the best of my ability. And then connection, right? We're so often isolated, especially in this day and age, and humans are a social species. So for me, connection is a huge part of health. So making sure I'm not just, seeing only one or two people, but I'm really interacting as well as not even just on social media, but in the real world. And for me, that's kind of maybe my 3 pillars of, emotional health for sure. Making sure I'm allowing myself to feel my feelings and knowing that, negative emotions aren't bad. They're just messages from our body. So yeah.
I love it. That's awesome. Well, Victoria, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your expertise. This was pure gold. I know our listeners are loving this as well. So thank you for your work, for everything that you put out to the world, and for sharing it all with us today.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.
All right, how awesome was that interview? Was it jam-packed with great information or what? If you loved this episode, we would love it if you shared it with somebody. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is struggling with their nutrition choices or wants to make better nutrition choices but isn't sure how to go about doing so? Share this episode with them so they can learn about Victoria's process in order to help them make better choices with their food and better choices throughout their life. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find this podcast when they're looking for information on exercise and when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week. So what did you think about that episode? Did you find the information useful? If you enjoyed what we discussed today, then you are going to love the Exercise for Life Secrets training, which you can get registered for free by going to secrets.exerciseforlifemethod.com. It's going on this Thursday and space is limited. So head there now, secrets.exersiseforlifemethod.com to get signed up. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.